All right, we're going to go over the muscles that move the knee complex in flexion and extension. And just to review, the tibiofemoral joint is the distal femur, forms the proximal portion of the joint. The proximal tibia forms the distal portion of the joint. So femur articulates with tibia. However, it is the distal femur that forms the proximal end of the joint, and it is the proximal tibia that forms the distal component of the joint. Okay? The tibiofemoral joint is a modified hinge that moves in extension and flexion. The joint axis goes right through those epicondyles of the femur. So any muscle that falls in front of that joint axis is going to be a knee extensor, and any muscle that falls behind is going to be a knee flexor. So the hardest part of this week's lab is remembering all the names. So let's start with the muscles that extend the knee. Going superficial to deep, last week we had the rectus femoris. We found it originating on the AIIS and inserting into the tibial tuberosity. Some of you could see it last week as being a hip flexor, knee extensor. If you wanted to make it actively insufficient, ask it to do both of those actions at the same time. So ask your rectus femoris to flex the hip and extend the knee. It will not have enough active tension to do it both at the same time. Underneath the rectus femoris are the one-jointed vastus intermedialis. So remember that intertrochanteric line down to the tibial tuberosity. And I'm hoping you can see that this muscle cannot be a hip muscle. It does not originate on the pelvis, but it does extend the knee. The vastus medialis comes from the linea aspera to wrap around to the front. It is a knee extensor. And the vastus lateralis comes from the linea aspera on the lateral side. Again, all four quadriceps. Quad stands for four. The bellies are up here in the thigh, and just above the kneecap they become a common tendon to insert into the tibial tuberosity. All four quadriceps, rectus femoris, vastus intermedialis, vastus medialis, and vastus lateralis are innervated by the same nerve that innervates the front of the thigh, that being the femoral. So again, one more time. AIIS down to tibial tuberosity by way of common tendon. I am the rectus femoris. I am the only two-jointed quadricep. I will become actively insufficient if you ask me to flex the hip and extend the knee at the same time. In other words, if you ask me to flex my hip and now extend my knee, that's as far as I can go, and I'm going to get a cramp in my rectus femoris before too long. Okay? Underneath the rectus femoris are the three one-jointed quadriceps: vastus intermedialis, vastus medialis, and vastus lateralis. Okay? Femoral nerve. The rectus femoris is the only one that's prone to active insufficiency. Looking behind. Let's just go over to this side. Okay? Muscle falls behind that frontal axis, going to be a knee flexor. We have 4. The hamstrings. So last week we saw the medial hamstrings, semitendinosus and semimembranosus, originating on the ischial tuberosity. The membranosus travels down to the medial tibial condyle. You can see it in the back. So yeah, it's a hip extensor and a knee flexor. And you got it. How to make it actively insufficient? Ask it to extend the hip and flex the knee at the same time. Okay? The other medial hamstring is the semitendinosus. It too originates on the ischial tuberosity, comes down to the front of the medial tibial condyle. Hip extensor, knee flexor. Both of those are innervated by the sciatic nerve. The lateral hamstring, biceps femoris, ischial tuberosity, down to the head of the fibula. That would be the long head of the biceps femoris. Hip extensor, knee flexor, sciatic nerve. And for this week, the biceps, which implies 2, has a short head. The short head of the biceps femoris originates on the linea aspera. It too inserts into the fibular head, but again, I'm hoping you can see the short head of the biceps femoris cannot hyperextend the hip. It can only flex the knee. Okay? So again, how do you make the semimembranosus, semitendinosus, and biceps femoris actively insufficient? Okay? Ask the poor person to extend their knee, their hip, and flex their knee. I can't do it. Let me back that up so you can see I'm not faking. Okay? In other words, if you ask me to do both motions at the same time, I can flex my knee, terrific, or I can hyperextend my hip, terrific. But if you ask me to do both, I run out of tension. I'm going to get a cramp in my hamstring before too long. Okay? Hamstrings, knee flexors. Medial hamstrings, semimembranosus, semitendinosus, sciatic nerve. Ischial tuberosity to medial tibial condyle. Lateral hamstrings. Biceps femoris, long head, ischial tuberosity to fibular head. Short head of the biceps femoris, cannot extend the hip, does not attach to the pelvis. It originates on the linea aspera of the femur. It can only flex the knee. The biceps femoris short head is innervated by the common perineal nerve. So nerves for this week, we got anterior thigh, femoral, posterior thigh, sciatic, and common perineal nerve. Common perineal to the short head of the biceps femoris.